So tonight we're getting into lesson 2 of the world of Kabbalah. Lesson 2 comes the heels of lesson 1. And lesson 1, just to quickly recap, we said that we're going to explain the various ideas in Kabbalah, but perhaps the most important idea of Kabbalah, the most important idea of this class is not so much the study of Kabbalah as much as it is the understanding of Kabbalah and bringing it into practical terms. Because Kabbalistic ideas can be out there, can be terms that we really don't understand, and perhaps some of us didn't understand some of the terms that we mentioned in the first class. Welcome, David. But the idea of this class is to understand Kabbalah, and more importantly, not just to understand Kabbalah, but to connect it to ourselves and to our lives. Welcome, John. And so, they say the story where this mystic decided that he wants to, I'm going to mess up this joke. Well, we got to start with the joke. They say the story of, did you hear about the mystic who wanted to become a venture Kabbalist? He wanted to invest in private equity and get the people involved and transform them into profits. All right, so that's a joke because we have to start with a joke. But just to quickly recap what we spoke about, really the idea that we're trying to accomplish here is, let me just shut the door. The idea we're accomplishing here, as we spoke last time, is to understand Seder Hishtalshalut. What is Seder Hishtalshalut? Seder Hishtalshalut, we explained last time, right? We all know the word Seder. Seder means an order, which is, our Passover Seder may not be such an order, or depending, on Uncle Irving, if he's there or not. But, Seder means order. And what is Hishtalshalut? Hishtalshalut, we said, is the order of devolution, but perhaps it can also be the chain of events, because really that's what we're discussing here. This big idea that really runs through most of Kabbalistic writings and most of Kabbalah is the chain of events from when God to being just God to creating us, the entire physical world within which we are here now. And so it's a chain of events, how it came from just oneness of God until the creation of this world. And we said that we're going to go backwards. Why are we going backwards? Because it's easier for us to relate to things that are closer to us. And so that's why we're going to go backwards from the order, the chain of events, from the divine up until, or as Kabbalah calls it, the Ein Sof, divine infinity, which we'll get to in lesson 6, up until the creation of our world. And that's why, for those of you who now have your books, we have this map. It's a wonderful map. Looks nothing like any map you've ever seen before. And this map, if you notice, we got the two sides on the map. The two sides on the map we explained last time is because this is the order of devolution. This is on the right side, or I guess the right side of the map, the left side if you're looking at it. It's in the back of the book. So we explained that the map, the right side of the map is the order of devolution, the chain of events in Kabbalistic terms. And then it's parallel, the order of events, the way it's reflected in ourselves. And why does that happen in ourselves? And that's because we quoted the verse from Job, which said, Mibsari echza lekah, from my flesh, I will perceive and understand the divine. Because God created us as a parallel to the entire chain of events. And so if we understand ourselves, we can then in turn understand the entire chain of events from divine infinity until our finite world. So that was just a quick recap of last week. And we explained that in the Kabbalistic terms on the bottom, those 3 blue circles, the bottom left there, the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Threw around a lot of Kabbalistic terms last week. I'm going to try to limit those this week. But Bria, basically, we said these are the 3 worlds of formation. Creation, formation, and Asiya is action, making. And so the idea of the world of creation is that first moment, this creation of other. something outside of God, so to speak, something that can feel its own self-identity, its ego, it's an other from God. That is a creation. The formation is literally as it's formed into a separate entity. And then finally, we have the third world, the world of Asiya, which is, we gave the example of a teenager who now says, Mom and Dad, I'm done. I don't need you. You guys are nothing. We don't understand you. I don't need you. I don't understand you. I don't care for you. I'm entirely independent. I think we know what that means, right? We hope they don't say that, but it's kind of the way it works. And so that's really what happens in the world of Asiya that we explained. That's, in other words, when we become someone who can say, you know what, I'm a separate entity from God. I'm entirely disconnected from God. To be someone who's created by God, to be able to say that needs that entire chain of events, that order of devolution, which brings to mind a fascinating story of how low one can go and kind of deny the existence of God. They say the story of the great sage who came to a friend of his, great academic, great poet, and they had these philosophical discussions quite often. And this poet was staunchly anti-creator. It's all the Big Bang, it happened on its own. And one day this rabbi comes into the poet's office and he sees the poet is in the middle of writing a beautiful piece of poetry. In the middle, he excuses himself in the middle of the conversation and he walks out of the room. So the rabbi goes ahead and quickly from the inkwell takes, little few dots in his feather, and he goes ahead and he jots down the rest of the poem. And this poet, world famous poet, comes in and he says, wow, Rabbi, you did such a great job. But the rabbi did something else. Right before the poet came back in, he took that inkwell and he spilled it. And a little bit got smudged on the ink, on the paper, on the table. He says, Rabbi, you did such an amazing job with finishing the poem. And the rabbi says, me? I finished writing the poem? I didn't write the poem. The inkwell spilled over and it wrote itself. It just happened. The poet says, no, that can't be. Impossible. He says, what do you mean impossible? He says, oh, something so beautiful, something so wonderful. He says, so the rabbi turns to him and says, I don't understand. This entire magnificent world, the exquisite details, the beauty of it, that can happen on its own. But this little poem of 3 lines, that's impossible to happen on its own. How does a person reach such a point where we can say there's no God, there's no creator? It's only through this order of devolution, this chain of events from the infinite, divine infinity, up until us, our creation here. And we said the parallel in the human was the thought, speech, and action, which is outside of ourselves, and the idea that we can constantly switch them at will. We're not confined. We're not forced to act in any specific manner. We're not forced to think in any specific manner. We're not even hardwired to speak in a certain manner. And we can switch our action at will. We can stop talking at will. Some people, me, not so much. Kids at 5 in the morning, also not. And then, we can't stop thinking, but we can definitely switch out our thoughts at will. And that was, as we explained last week, the parallel, the human parallel. So that was about last week. Where do we come to this week? We come to this week, and if you have the books, we're on page we are on page 38. We're on page 38. If you come to this week, we're on page 38, where we are going to enter this class, and what we will discuss this entire lesson, if you look at the map, is the green, otherwise known as the world of Atzilut. Now, don't get scared. There's a lot of Kabbalistic words. We'll get to them. It's easier to understand, easier to relate to. We're going to get to them. But that's what we will be discussing today is Atzilut. Now, what is Atzilut? The Hebrew word, we'll get to it in a moment, but what is Atzilut? Atzilut is the world of emanation, the origin of self. In other words, the prequel to Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, the prequel to the creation of ourselves. It says Atzilut. If you're looking where it says Atzilut, it says Atzilut on the side, sideways, right here in the middle, right there. Oh. It says Atzilut, right? Finite. So the idea of Atzilut and what we're going to discuss today is the origin of this self-identity. What was the prequel? What happened before these three realms that we discussed last week? What happened before the creation, formation, and actualization of the human being and all of creation? This is what we will be discussing today. Now, as I mentioned last week, there's going to be many Kabbalistic terms we're going to mention, and you may feel lost at certain times during the class. First off, you can just ask questions if you feel a little lost during the class. But second off, you may want to wait because things will start falling into place as we get along. I kind of switched around a little bit the structure of tonight's class to hopefully make it more relatable and more understandable. Yes, Joan.
When were all these terms first used?
These terms, it's a great question. When were all these terms first used? These terms are used in Kabbalistic writings. Some of them originate in the Zohar, which was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai back in the 1st century. So we're going some 2,000 years ago. Some of these terms are actually used in the Torah. Some of these terms are used in the Torah, as we shall soon see, some of the quotes in the Torah and the books of the prophets. And some of these terms, very few of these terms originated with the later Kabbalists in the 14th, 15th centuries. But by and large, the terms originated in the Torah and in the Zohar.
And do all these learnings come from the Torah Shabbat? Like, is that how should we think about, just piggybacking off that question, sort of like the original source for most of it?
The original source of the wording of the teachings?
I guess the concepts. Is it all Torah Shabbat, or is this stuff that's, I guess, how should we think about?
Thank you. It's a great question.
How should we think about that?
I think Yitzhak called me today with that, yesterday it was, with that exact question. We discussed it at length at the course Book Smart. For those who joined last year, I think it was the fall course last year, Book Smart, where we discussed the origins of various dimensions of the Torah and categories of the Torah, and we discussed it at great length. But just in short, Kabbalah is one of the 4 dimensions of the Torah, and so just as some of Kabbalah is in the written Torah, some of Kabbalah is in the oral Torah, but the oral Torah and the written Torah are all given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. And so really these concepts all originated from the beginning of time. And throughout the ages, initially they were only studied by the few great sages, especially for the first many, many centuries. They were only discussed and studied by a select few sages. And only in the 15th century or early 16th century by the great Arizal, who's known by his acronym, the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, where he started teaching Kabbalistic concepts more prolifically and to the masses, really. And he not only taught them, but he encouraged others to teach them to many other people. And he said it's a mitzvah to reveal this dimension of the Torah that until now has been only for the select few. And that's because the closer we get to the coming of Mashiach, the more necessary it is to understand every single aspect of the Torah. By way of metaphor, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. When you're in a war and you're in a battle and it's for an existential battle, there's no such thing as things are hidden, things are secret. This is the king's treasure. This has to stay, for tough times. Now's the tough time. All the treasure comes out in an existential battle. As we get closer to the coming of Mashiach, taught the Arizal and later mystics, we're at a point where it's kind of an existential battle for the soul of the Jewish people. And therefore, it's important to bring out the treasures and teach Kabbalah to everyone, which perhaps is also a thought on some of you may be thinking, and I got this question once or twice from some people before the class, isn't Kabbalah only for people that are 40 years or older? So, sorry? And married, correct. And so, I'm not 40 yet, and I started studying Kabbalah before I was married. And the mystics really explained that that was a limitation back before the times of the Arizal. The Arizal himself wasn't 40. He passed away before he turned 40. And so the idea of studying Kabbalah, it did have many limitations, but the closer we get to the era of Mashiach, the more important it is to study the backstory, really, of the Torah. So, Evan, I hope I answered the question. Somewhat. All right. We'll continue with the class. All right. So, what we're going to really attack today or address today is what is your purpose in life? Now, what do I mean our purpose in life? Think about it when you wake up in the morning. What's your purpose? So, you have your regular purpose, which is I wake up in the morning, I eat breakfast, I do my prayers, whatever it is, and then I go to work and I have a family, But the question that we're asking here is what's your specific mission in life as it relates to your soul? Right. Last week, we spoke about the outside of the soul, the garments of the soul, our thought, our speech, our action. Today, we're talking about your actual soul. What is your soul's unique mission? And we'll get to that in a moment, and you'll understand it more when we get to the story on page 38, text 1. I'm going to read it. It's a fascinating story. It was told by the previous Rebbe, and the story goes as follows. This is text 1. A wealthy businessman and his coachman arrived in a city one Friday afternoon. The rich man was settled at the best hotel in town, and the coachman went off to his humble lodgings. Both washed and dressed for Shabbos and then set out for the synagogue for the evening prayer. On his way to Shul, the businessman came across a large wagon that had swerved off the road and was stuck in a ditch. Rushing to help a fellow in need, the businessman climbed down into the ditch and began pushing and pulling at the wagon together with its hapless driver. But for all his finesse at handling the most challenging of business deals, when it came to extracting a wagon and a team of horses from a muddy ditch, our businessman was hopelessly out of his depth. After struggling for an hour in the knee-deep mud, he succeeded only in ruining his best suit of Shabbos clothes, amassing the most impressive collection of cuts and bruises, and getting the wagon even more impossibly embedded in the mud. Finally, he dragged his limping body to the synagogue, arriving a scant minute before the start of Shabbos. Meanwhile, the coachman arrived early to the synagogue and sat down to recite a few chapters of Psalms. At the synagogue, he found a group of wandering paupers, and being blessed with a most generous nature, the coachman invited them all to share his Shabbos meal. Excuse me. When the synagogue sexton approached the poor and homeless to arrange meal placements for them with the town's householders, as is customary in Jewish communities, he received the same reply from them all. Thank you, but I have already been invited for the Shabbos meal. Unfortunately, however, the coachman's budget was hardly equal to his generous heart. It would be most difficult to believe that his dozen guests left his table with more than a shadow of a meal in their hungry stomachs. Thus, the coachman, with his 20 years of experience in pulling wagons out of mud holes, took it upon himself to feed a small army, while the wealthy businessman, whose Shabbos meal leftovers could have easily fed every hungry man within a 10-mile radius, floundered about in a ditch. All right, but the story doesn't end there. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch told this story and explained its lesson. Every soul is entrusted with a mission unique to her alone, and is granted the specific aptitudes, talents, and resources necessary to excel in her ordained role. One must take care not to become one of those lost souls who wander haplessly through life, trying their hand at every field of endeavor, except for what is truly and inherently their own. Now, let me ask you a question. Think about the coachman and the businessman. Did they do a mitzvah? Yes. Of course they did a mitzvah. Did they do a good deed? Were they helpful? Yes. So what are we talking about over here? What's the idea that we're expressing here? The idea that we're expressing here is not so much the idea of, was it a good deed or not? Of course it was a good deed. But, procrastinators, right? They say, I used to be a procrastinator, but now I don't even get around to it. And a procrastinator's model is that, why do it tomorrow if I can do it the next day? What's the idea of a procrastinator? We all have this concept of procrastination. Some of us are good with time, but perhaps we're not good with time management. We're not good with organizing what we need done, right? There are things as one item that we really need to get done today. But we have a whole list of other items that also kind of maybe should be done also at some point. And sometimes we'll push off the main item that needs to get done for all the other items. Are all the other items important? Perhaps they need to get done. But this one item that only you can do that's really necessary, you keep on pushing it off. That's the idea here. Yes, it's a mitzvah, but you know what? Had the coachman been there for the horse would have been out in no time. Had the businessman been there for the people at the synagogue, they would have had full bellies by the time they were done. So the question really is, where's my soul? What's my soul's mission in life? Each one of us, what's our soul? Tonight, what we are going to do is analyze from the divine perspective, the left side of the map, the concept of Atzilut. We'll understand what that is. And then through that, we will glean an understanding of what our soul's unique mission is in life. To get to that, we're going to ask a long-winded question. So I'll give you the lowdown of the question before we get to the long-winded aspect of it. The question is, does God have definitions? Can you define God? That's the question. Now keep that in mind as we look at text. We're going to skip around over here a little bit. We look at text 3. Text 3 and 4 are one and the same. It's just one's a quote from Proverbs, the other is a quote from Chronicles. Evan, can you please read for us text 3 and 4 on page 42 and 43?
Text 3 and 4, yep. God with wisdom founded the earth, with understanding established the heavens, with his knowledge the depths we were split. And 7 attributes. Unto you, God, is greatness and power and beauty and triumph and splendor. For all in heaven and on earth is yours. Unto you, God, is kingship.
Thank you. So what do we have here? We have 2 verses that seemingly state clearly God is wise, right? God founded the earth with understanding, right? He has knowledge. And then the next verse continues on page 43. God is greatness and power and beauty, triumph, splendor, right? Which Kabbalah calls by slightly different names, kindness and severity and discipline and so on and so forth. In other words, we're giving all these definitions to God, right? We're giving all these definitions to God, which tell us that what's the concept of a definition? What is the definition of a definition? The definition of a definition means it's to exclude all others, right? When you look in the dictionary and you say, what does this word mean? It tells you the definition of the word, and what it's telling you is that's the definition to the exclusion of all other meanings, because that word, the word cup means this. A pen is not a cup. So a definition, when you give something a definition, what does it mean? It's limited to that definition. So when we give definitions to God, what we're saying is God is defined by being wise, being kind, being understanding. All these definitions we just read in these verses. In other words, we're limiting God. We're saying God fits into these definitions, but hey, that answers our question. The verse clearly states God has definitions. Now let's look at text 5. Yitzchak, can you read for us text 5? Well, go ahead, read it loud.
Our sages purposefully refer to God as Kadosh, the Holy One, blessed be He, as opposed to the Intelligent One, blessed be He. For God's true self is unknowable. All that we know about God is that He is detached from and beyond every form of physicality and any existing entity. It is therefore appropriate to refer to God as the Holy One, for the term Kadosh describes an entity that is transcended. Indeed, God is Peshitut, the ultimate abstract simplicity.
So we'll get to that final line in a moment. Thank you, Yitzhak. What are we saying here in this text, text 5? Text 5, by the way, is from the great Maharal of Prague, who's famously known for the creation of the Golem. I don't know if there's a good word to translate the Golem. The Golem is just the Golem. So the Maharal was a great philosopher. He wrote many, many volumes on philosophy. And what's the Maharal saying here? Excuse me. The Hebrew word kadosh is normally translated to holy, right? Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 said the Lord of hosts. But what does holy mean? The word kadosh, the literal translation of the word kadosh, means separate. Yeah, there we go. We got some scholars here. It means separate. What's the idea of God? What's he saying here? God is separate from our understanding. God's beyond us. God's something which is undefinable, unknowable. There's no definition to God. That's why when we refer to God, we don't refer to God as the intelligent one, the great one. What do we refer to God? The separate one, blessed be he. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be he. And holy means to be separate, to be disconnected, unknowable, undefinable. And in the word in Kabbalah, this final line, God is Shitut, ultimate abstract simplicity. In other words, what's God? Undefinable. Undefinable. So now which one is right? Is God someone who is definable with all these definitions of being kind, being wonderful, being great, being knowledgeable and understanding? Does God have wisdom? Or is God undefinable, unknowable, beyond absolute abstract simplicity, or otherwise known as Pshitut? And the answer is yes. They're both correct. Now, how are they both correct? First off, welcome to Kabbalah. They're both correct. What does that mean? We'll get to it. It brings to mind this story of this great rabbi who used to adjudicate cases, and these two individuals come to the rabbi, and the first guy gives his whole speech on why he thinks the items at hand belong to him. And the rabbi turns to him, and the rabbi says, you know what, Chaim, you're right. And then Yankel goes ahead and he gives his speech, his shtickle, and he explains why it belongs to him. And the rabbi says, Yankel, you're right. And the rabbi hears from his wife out in the back room, and she screams, Rabbi, how can they both be right? And the rabbi says, you know what, Genando, you're also right. What does it mean that they're all right? And this is where this phenomenal idea, now all these concepts that I'm explaining, and really even all the metaphors aren't my own. They are found in Kabbalistic writings throughout the ages. Now, I've mentioned in the past that the Rebbe studied in the University of Berlin, and the Sorbonne, there were great professors, and one of the professors that was there at the time was the great Albert Einstein, right? He was one of our buddies, Yankel, Albert, who was a Jewish boy, right? Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, his great imagination, his great minds, E equals MC squared, right? Theory of relativity, and all those other theories that no one knows about and no one talks about because we're not mathematicians and we're not academics, right? But we all know he's the great genius. Imagine he was called into a fourth grade classroom, and the teacher asks Professor Einstein to go ahead and explain to the fourth graders theory of relativity. If he is able to go ahead and explain his genius ideas to fourth graders, that makes him an even greater genius. Because to know abstract concepts in their abstractness, in their lofty areas is one thing, but it's very limited. It's just in the greatness. To be able to take those concepts and not really dumb them down, but kind of siphon them and be able to impart them to younger students, to students who aren't at that level, Now that's a genius. I forgot who said, someone said, genius isn't to be able to write a concept on 15 pages. Genius is be able to take those 15 pages and put them into a half a page. Right? Genius is to be able to go ahead and reach every level every month. So if you had two professors, one was only able to teach abstract concepts, and the other one was only able to teach fourth grade. We have a disconnect. They're both very, very limited. One is limited to fourth grade, one is limited to geniuses. And then you have the ultimate genius, who is able to take these tremendously abstract concepts that he's able to explain to real advanced students and go ahead and explain it also to the fourth graders, and they comprehend his idea, say theory of relativity, on their level, but they comprehended it. So he's not teaching them something else. He's not telling them about his life and his upbringing and how he moved to, right, where did Einstein move to Princeton, right? He's not telling him how he moved to New Jersey. He's telling them the theory of relativity, and he's able to impart that to the minds of these fourth graders. That's the genius. So now, if I ask you this genius, right? Did anything change in him? Did anything change in the genius now that he's teaching it to the fourth graders? No. He's just able to have both sides of the coin in his mind and able to impart it to these children. This same concept is what we have in the divine. This same idea is what we have in the divine. The divine, on the one hand, God has the unknowable, undefinable essence of who God really is. On the other hand, God also chose to be able to be defined. For what purpose? For us to be able to connect to God. God enabled both sides of the coin, because God ultimately has everything in him. Because if God was limited to only the infinite, that itself is finite, because he's limited to the infinite. But now that God can possess both infinite and finite, now that's unique. That's beyond both infinity and finitude. Let's have a look. We're going to skip a little bit over here to text 8. Let's go to text 8. Judy, would you like to read text 8 on page 47? You're muted. No, we can't hear you.
That's why I can't read tonight.
Got it. Okay. Randy, would you like to read text 8?
What?
Text 8 on page 47.
Sure.
Go ahead.
The infinite one is perfect without any flaw. Should you assert that he has infinite power but lacks the power of finitude, you deny his perfection.
Thank you. So this is perhaps the one text that really encapsulates everything we've been talking about until now. If you deny finitude to God, then that itself is finite. Now, both these sides are in God. And here's an example. And that's why, it pays to have kids in preschool because, well, you pay to have kids in preschool, but it also pays to have kids in preschool because, you remember what you learned in preschool and everything you ever learned, right? You learned in preschool. So, Ella, can you pass me the scissor behind you, please? And I'm going to do a little show and tell there, a little arts and crafts. So give me a minute. Let's figure something crude out over here. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. Now I did number 11 because that's the easiest to cut out on a paper. And I tried to get a black piece of paper just because the contrast is easier, but thankfully Ita only has colorful pieces of paper. So if you look at this white piece of paper, is there any word written on it? There's nothing written on it. It's simplicity. It's pshitut. You can put anything on it, right? But you don't even have to put anything on it. It has everything within it. If I cover this white piece of paper with this piece, what do I see now on the white piece of paper? Number 11. Number 11, is it on the white piece or is it not on the white piece? Well, it is and it isn't simultaneously. That's the idea of God. God is pshitut. God is absolute simplicity. God is undefinable, unknowable. Yet God chooses to be able to be defined as he goes through this chain of events, this devolution, to be able to relate to us. Because, you know, without God choosing to relate to us, we would have that disconnect. We'd be entirely disconnected. We'd have no way of grasping God, which is why God chose to go through this entire order of devolution in order to be able to connect with us. Now we get to this idea of, right? We said, imagine the professor, the genius, the way he's able to reach all minds, he's able to reach even the mind of a fourth grader, and to impart his wisdom to the fourth grader, that the fourth grader can understand his wisdom. Time. It says over here. So how does he do it? He does it with all sorts of tricks to be able to bring down his wisdom to a lower level. That's you. You're not missing much. So to bring it to a lower level. What does God use to impart himself, so to speak, his energy, in order to create us? That's where we're going to turn back to text 6. This is on page, here we go, page 45, text 6. This is a quote direct from the Zohar, the foundational book of Kabbalah, the earliest writings we have of Kabbalah. Text 6 on page 45. You are one, but not in a numerical sense. You're beyond numbers, right? You are exalted above all the exalted ones, hidden from all the hidden ones. No thought can grasp you whatsoever. You are the one who has brought forth 10 ornaments, which we call the 10 sefirot, to direct concealed worlds and revealed worlds. What is this text saying? There's the 2 paragraphs. There's the first paragraph saying God is that blank white sheet. Simplicity. Absolute simplicity. What did we call that? Who remembers? Pshitut. Very good. Pshitut. Pshitut. You can look in the textbook later for that word, but it's a good word. Pshitut. God is, right? That first paragraph that we just read, God is beyond everything, unimaginable, undefinable, unknowable, impossible, because God is infinite. But simultaneously, God is the one, the same God is the one who brought forth these 10 ornaments, these 10 ways of imparting his divine energy to us in order to make himself relatable, in order to connect with us, and in order to create us. These 10 levels are called sefirot. Sefirot are what we will move on to now in explaining God and this level of Atzilut.